All right, so today we're starting up a new section, and our new section today is about apartheid. Go ahead and make a new section title, Apartheid, and underline. So write down apartheid and underline. Now, apartheid is an Afrikaans word, and we'll talk about what this word means in Afrikaans. All right, go ahead and make a new bullet if you would, please. And we're going to write down the word apartheid again for our bullet. So, bullet apartheid. So as I said before, apartheid is an Afrikaans word. Afrikaans is a language spoken in South Africa. It's a combination of Dutch, German, and the African languages in the area. So it's a combination of several different languages makes Afrikaans. So what does apartheid mean? Well, go ahead and make it number one, and we're going to write down separateness. So apartheid means separateness. What was apartheid about? Well, it was a government policy of racial segregation between the racial groups in South Africa. 2, government policy of racial segregation. So as I said, apartheid, it means separateness, and it's a government policy of racial segregation that separates the races from one another. So how does this idea of apartheid, how does the separation of the races in South Africa, how does that all begin? Well, we talked about already before about how the Dutch kind of came into South Africa, and eventually the British then came into the area. Eventually the British end up getting into a war with the Dutch called the Boer Wars, and that eventually ends with a British victory. But in 1910, the area of South Africa declares their independence from the British, becoming their own independent nation. So Afrikaans really starts to begin at this point of independence. Go ahead and make a bullet and write down independence. So when did South Africa declare their independence? Well, they declared their independence in 1910. Go ahead and make a 1 and write down 1910. So South Africa becomes independent in 1910. Now, when South Africa becomes independent in 1910, the only people that are allowed to vote in South Africa were the white South Africans. You kind of have 3 racial groups in South Africa. You had your white South Africans, you had your black South Africans, you had your colored South Africans, and colored South Africans in this case were people who were biracial, or people who were from India could also be put into the colored category as well. There was a sizable chunk of an Indian migrant population that was also in South Africa as well. Now, as I said, if you're a black South African or colored South African, no vote for you. Only white South Africans were allowed to vote. Go ahead and make it 2. Afrikaans was made the official language. So Afrikaans was made the official language. And once again, that's Dutch, German, and South African languages such as Xhosa combined together to make Afrikaans. So 2, Afrikaans was made the official language. Now, white South Africans, they made up about 21.5% of the total population of the area. And they did speak English. However, the whites that could speak Afrikaans, those were mainly the Boer populations. And those guys were still kind of bitter about the entire, war thing and such, the Boer Wars. So the white population was 21.5%, as that mainly made up of kind of like the British, English, and then the Boers. Those are the people that were the white South Africans. Got to make it 3, and we're going to write down white South Africans made up 21.5%. So 3, white South Africans made up 21.5%. So let's kind of know that they were 21.5% of the total population were the white South Africans, and they're the ones that were allowed to vote. They also were pretty much in control since they could vote. Everybody that was in the government was a white South African. Since they were in control of the government, pretty much all the businesses were also owned by white South Africans as well. All right. 4. Black South Africans made up 67% of the population. So then make a 4. Black South African population, 67%. So the Black South Africans made up 67% of the population. Now you notice obviously that doesn't add up to 100. As I said, there was a third group called colored South Africans, which was people that were biracial, and also kind of including the Indian immigrant population as well that also lived in the area that were brought over. And the Indian migrant population that was brought over was done so to mainly do mining, if I remember correctly. But as I said, Black South Africans made up 67% of the population, and they were not allowed to vote. So by 1910, Black South Africans only owned 10% of the total country. Okay, so of the total country, only 10% of it was owned by Black South Africans. The rest of it, all other 90%, were owned by white South Africans or the colored South Africans or the Indian migrant population. Go ahead and make a 5, and we're going to write down Black South Africans own less than 10%. So just kind of keep in mind that of the land territory in South Africa, only 10% were owned by Black South Africans. So 6-7% of the population, 10% of the land they controlled. And I said the rest of 90% was controlled by the white South Africans and the colored South Africans. So 33% of the country was, 90% of the country was controlled by 33% of the population. Mainly the 21.5% is the one that controlled most of it, mainly the white South Africans. So what ends up happening is we kind of established what was going on. Black South Africans weren't allowed to vote. So what is something that ends up happening that the white South Africans end up passing? Well, they end up passing a law called the Native Land Act. Go ahead and make a 6. We're going to write down Native Land Act, and then we're going to make an equal sign. So 6, Native Land Act, and then equal sign. So the Native Land Act limited the ownership of the land of the Black South Africans. They had to live in particular areas that were called townships. And these townships were tiny clusters of homes. So as you got Native Land Act, equal sign, then we're going to write down after the equal sign, tiny clusters of homes called townships. So the Native Land Act made it so that Black South Africans could only live in these tiny clusters of homes called townships. So that's kind of the area they had to live in. And I'll show you a map in a sec where those townships were at. So they were restricted. So not only did they own a small percentage of the land area, they were further restricted in the areas that they could own by the townships. As I said, other ethnic groups that you had a colored population that was 9% of the population, people who were kind of biracial, and Indian immigrants made up 2.5% of the population. Both of these groups, both coloreds and Indian immigrants, had more rights than Black South Africans, but they still weren't treated equally as white South Africans. So the Native Land Act, you can see kind of here in the map. I'll make the map bigger here so you can see it a bit better. Yeah, or not. So the map here, so here's South Africa right here. You can see all its territory here. The areas in color here, like the green, the brown, the blue, and kind of this color right down here, kind of like a brownish. Those were the Native Land Acts. Those were townships. Okay, so the only places that the Black South Africans lived in were in the places that are in color here on the map, which is not 10% of the land area. That's about 7.3% of the land area. So they were further restricted in the places that they could live. If you're a Black South African, you could not buy any land outside of these townships. So if you wanted to buy any land in these white areas here, nope, you can't. You have to be in one of these colored zones, and that's the place where you could buy land at. You couldn't buy it outside of the land. So you can see kind of the problems and such with that, okay? Also, there was a lot of problems as well. Like we talked about before, most businesses were owned by white South Africans. And because most businesses were owned by white South Africans, that means that you would have to leave a lot of times these colored zones to go outside your zone to go find work. So that was also a big problem as well. All right, we're going to stop there for today.